All right, Chapter 17, Introduction to a History of Psychology. Humanistic, third force, psychology. The mind, body, and the spirit. Generally speaking, we can divide human nature into three major components. The mind, our intellect, the body, our biological makeup, and the spirit, our emotional makeup. Various philosophies and, more recently, schools of psychology have tended to emphasize one of these aspects more than the others. Which philosophy or school of psychology prevailed at any given moment has often been closely tied to the larger zeitgeist. The decade of the 1960s was particularly troubled time in the United States. An unpopular Vietnam War accelerated when its corresponding anti-war movement assassinations felled JFK, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. The violent racial process occurred in a number of major cities. Hippies and college students were in open rebellion against their values and their parents and their nation. Like the ancient skeptics, they found little worth being in, and like ancient cynics, they dropped out of the society and sought a simpler natural life. This age of Aquarius, which we are in now, was clearly not a time when traditional rational philosophy with emphasis on the mind, or empirical philosophy with emphasis on the body, was very appealing. In the mid-20th century, structuralism appeared as a school, and functionalism and Gestalt psychology had lost their distinctiveness as schools by being assimilated into other viewpoints. In the 1950s and early 1960s, only behaviorism and psychoanalysis remained as influential, intact schools of thought. In the troubled times described above, many saw knowledge of humans provided by behaviorism and psychoanalysis as incomplete, distorted, or both. Needing a new view of psychology, one that emphasized neither the mind nor the body, but the human spirit. In the early 1960s, a group of psychologists headed by Abraham Maslow started a movement referred to as third force psychology. These psychologists claimed that the other two forces in psychology, behaviorism and psychoanalysis, neglected a number of important human attributes. They said that by applying the technique used by the natural sciences to the study of humans, behaviorism likened humans as robots, lower animals, and computers. For behaviorists, there was nothing unique about humans. The major argument against psychoanalysis was that it was concentrated mainly on the emotionally disturbed people and on developing techniques for making abnormal people normal. What was missing, according to third force psychologists, was information that would help already healthy individuals become healthier. That is, to reach their full potential. What was needed was a model of humans that emphasized their uniqueness and their positive aspects rather than their negative aspects. It was this type of model that third force psychologists attempted to provide. Although third force psychology became very popular during the 1960s and 1970s, its popularity began to wane in the 1980s. Nevertheless, the behaviorism and psychoanalysis, third force psychology remained influential in contemporary psychology. Third force psychology contrasts vividly with other approaches because it is not deterministic in explaining human behavior. Rather, it assumes that humans are free to choose their own type of existence. Instead of attributing the causes of behavior to stimuli, drive stages, genetics, and early experience, third force psychologists claim that the most important cause of behavior is subjective reality. Because these psychologists do not assume determinism, they are not practicing science in the traditional sense, and they make no apology for that. Science, in its present form, they say, is not equipped to study, explain, or understand human nature. New science is needed, a human science. Antecedents of third force psychology. Like almost everything else in modern psychology, third force psychology is not new. We can readily trace it from philosophies of romanticism and existentialism. Also, in Chapter 7, we saw that the Romantics, such as Rousseau, insisted that humans are more than machines, which is how the empiricists and sensationalists describe them, and more than just logical, rational beings, which is how the rationalists describe them. And like ancient cynics, the Romantics trusted reason, religious dogma, science, and societal laws that guide human conduct. For them, the only valid guide for a person's behavior is the person's honest feelings. The Romantics, especially Rousseau, believe that humans are naturally good and gregarious, and if given freedom, they would become happy, fulfilled, and social minded. That is, given freedom, people would do what is best for themselves and for others. If people acted in self-destructive and antisocial ways, it was because their natural impulses had been interfered, interfered with by societal forces. People can never be bad, but societal systems can be, and often are. Also in Chapter 7, we saw the existentialists like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche emphasize the importance of meaning in human existence and the human ability to choose that meaning. This, too, is contrary for the philosophies of empiricism and rationalism. For Kierkegaard, subjectivity is truth. That is, if a person's beliefs that guide his or her life and determine the nature of his or her existence. Truth is not something external to the person waiting to be discovered by logical, rational thought processes. It is inside each person and is in fact created by each person. According to Nietzsche, God is dead and therefore humans are on their own. People can take two approaches to life. They can accept conventional morality as a guide for living and thus participate in herd conformity, or they can experiment with beliefs, values, life, and arrive at their own truths and morality, thus becoming supermen. Nietzsche clearly encouraged people to do the latter. Third force psychology combines the philosophies of romanticism and existentialism, and this combination is often called as humanistic psychology. Third force and humanistic psychology then are the same, but humanistic psychology is now the preferred label. In applying this label, however, it is important not to confuse the term humanistic with the terms human, humane, and humanitarian. The frequent confusion of the terms human, humane, and humanistic indicate that many do not clearly understand the meaning of the humanistic stance. To qualify as humanistic, it is not enough to concern human beings. Playing, working, building, traveling, organizing are all human activities. This, however, does not make them humanistic. Similarly, when these activities are performed, for instance, for charitable or philanthropic purposes, they are then raised to a humane or humanitarian status, which may be of vital importance, but still does not make them humanistic. For the endeavor or the viewpoint to qualify properly as humanistic, it must imply and focus upon a certain concept of man. A concept that recognizes his status as a person, irreducible to more elementary levels, his unique worth as a being potentially capable of autonomous judgment and action. The pertinent example of the difference between the humane and humanistic outlook is found in the case of behavior control that relies entirely upon positive reinforcement. Such an approach is humane or humanitarian, since it implements generous and compassionate attitudes, but it is not humanistic because the rationale behind the systemic behavior modification by purely external forces is incompatible with the concept of man as a self-purposive and proactive rather than merely reactive being. The focus of humanistic psychology is upon the specificity of man, upon that which sets him apart from all other species. It differs from other psychologies because it views man not solely as biological organism, modified by experience and culture, but as a person, a symbolic entity capable of pondering his existence, of lending it meaning and direction. Phenomenology. Throughout this text, we've referred to a variety of methodologies as phenomenological. In its most general form, phenomenology refers to any methodology that focuses on the experience as it occurs, without attempting to reduce that experience to its component parts. Thus, one can study consciousness without being a phenomenologist, as was the case with Wundt and Titchener, attempted to reduce conscious experience to its basic elements. After making this distinction, however, phenomenology can take many forms. The phenomenology of Johann Goethe and Ernest Mach focused on complex sensations, including afterimages and illusions. The phenomenology of Franz Brentano and his colleagues focused on the psychological acts such as judging, recollecting, expecting, doubting, fearing, hoping, or loving. As we saw in Chapter 9 in Brentano's brand of phenomenology, the concept of intentionality was extremely important. Brentano believed that every mental act refers to or intends something outside of itself. For example, I see a tree, I like my mother, or that was a good piece of pie. The contents of the mental act could be real or imagined, but the act, according to Brentano, always refers to or intends something. In Chapter 14, we saw how Brentano and Husserl's phenomenology influenced the Gestalt psychologists. Next, we will see how phenomenology was instrumental in the development of modern existentialism. The goal of Edmund Husserl from Chapter 9 was to take the type of phenomenology Brentano described and use it to create an objective, vigorous basis for philosophical and scientific inquiry. Like Brentano, Husserl believed that phenomenology could be used to create an objective bridge between the outer, physical world and the inner, subjective world. Of prime importance to Husserl was the phenomenology to be free of any preconceptions. That is, Husserl believed in reporting exactly what appears in consciousness, not what should be there according to some belief, theory, or model. As we saw in Chapter 9, however, Husserl believed that phenomenology could go beyond an analysis of intentionality. The study of intentionality determined how the mind and the physical world interact. Such a study is essential for the physical sciences, but in addition to the analysis of intentionality, Husserl proposed a type of phenomenology that concentrates on the workings of the mind that are independent of the physical world. Husserl called this pure phenomenology. Its purpose was to discover the essence of conscious experience, whereas the type of phenomenology that focuses on intentionality involves the person turned outward. Pure phenomenology involves the person turned inward. The goal of the latter is to accurately catalog all mental events and processes by which they interact with the environment, objects, or events. Husserl believed that an inventory of such acts and processes had to precede any adequate philosophy, science, or psychology because it is in those mental acts and processes of which all human knowledge is based. Husserl's pure phenomenology soon expanded into modern existentialism. Where Husserl was mainly interested in epistemology and in the essence of mental phenomena, the existentialists were interested in the nature of human existence. In philosophy, ontology, the study of existence, or what it means to be, the existentialists are concerned with two ontological questions. 1. What is the nature of human nature? And 2. What does it mean to be a particular individual? Thus, the existentialists use phenomenology to study either the important experiences that humans have in common or those experiences that individuals have as they live their lives. Experiences such as fear, dread, freedom, love, hate, responsibility, guilt, wonder, hope, and desire. Despair. Probably desire too. Husserl's phenomenology was converted to existential psychology mainly by his student Martin Heidegger, who we will consider subsequently. But Husserl's approach was not the only convergence of phenomenology and existentialism. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, 1908 to 1916, was among the most important voices in French psychology during World War II. Merleau-Ponty's doctorate was based on two books first published during the war, although not translated into the English until the 1960s. The Structure of Behavior offered a careful view and detailed criticism of Watson's behavioral approach to psychology, and then The Phenomenology of Perception outlined his existential phenomenological alternative. Although strongly influenced by Husserl, Merleau-Ponty also built on the works of William James and Gestalt psychologists. As a professor of child psychology and pedagogy, I struggle with this word, pedagogy, at Sorbonne, Merleau-Ponty remained more grounded within the academic psychology than most of the other thinkers we will consider in this chapter. Indeed, although much of what we will consider in this chapter is focused on clinical psychology, there are academic psychologists today that apply phenomenological methods, often Merleau-Ponty's methods, to topics across the landscape of psychology. Existential psychology. Although it is possible to find existential ideas in such early philosophers as Socrates and Augustine, it is traditional to mark the beginnings of existential philosophy to the writings of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. The great Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky is also commonly mentioned among the first existential thinkers. All of these individuals probe the meaning of human existence. They try to restore the importance of human feeling, choice, and individuality that had been minimized to rationalistic philosophies, such as those of Kant and Hegel, and in conceptions of people based on the Newtonian concepts, such as those proposed by British empiricists and French sensationalists. The second golden age of existentialism occurs in Europe around the time of World War II. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. Both Jean-Paul Sartre, 1905 to 1980, and Albert Camus, 1913 to 1960, would win Nobel Prize in Literature based on their writings in existentialism. Sartre's first novel, Nausea, vividly blends ideas of existentialism and Husserlian phenomenology in the form of fictional biographic. No Exit, perhaps his best-known work, is a short play set in the lobby of a hotel, or so it would seem. Deeply psychological, the drama culminates with an epiphany expressed by the framed line, "Hell is other people." Sartre is extremely interested in the power in the power we let others have over ourselves, and covered this topic by analyzing matters as simple as the transfixing human gaze to complex considerations of political movements. The intersection of social behavior and existentialism is also the focus of Sartre's close friend Simon de Beauvoir, one of the pioneers of modern feminist philosophy. Outside of his fiction, Sartre's other key works, Being and Nothingness, his response to Heidegger's classic Being and Time, which Sartre digested while serving as a prisoner of war. Like Sartre, Albert Camus worked as a writer for the French resistance during the part of the World War II, and both men would eventually find their fame in writing psychologically near existential fiction in the area of political science. Camus's most famous novellas include Stranger and The Fall. Both character studies are extremely interesting men. Camus is often associated with the absurd or the existential idea that to search for life's pre-oriented purpose is futile. Like Kierkegaard, Camus believed that our task to create meaning is there and no hidden truths for us to somehow discover by exploring religion, science, or any established philosophy. Although these ideas are central to all of his work, Camus's most academic consideration of absurdity is offered in his essay of The Myth of Sisyphus, an analysis of the psychology of suicide. Martin Heidegger, 1889 to 1976, was Husserl's student and then his assistant, and he dedicated his first edition of his famous book Being and Time in 1927 to Husserl. Heidegger had been chosen by Husserl and replaced him as a chair at Freiburg. But by the time this occurred, the men were no longer friends. Heidegger's work is generally considered the key bridge between existential philosophy and existential psychology. Many, if not most, in terms and concepts that appear in the writings of current existential psychologists can be traced to the writings of Heidegger. Like Husserl, Heidegger was a phenomenologist. But, unlike Husserl, Heidegger used phenomenology to examine the totality of human existence. And in 1933, Heidegger became rector at the University of Freiburg. In his inaugural speech, titled The Role of the University in the New Reich, was highly supportive. He was highly supportive of the Nazi Party. Although Heidegger resigned his rectorship a few months after Nazis took office, he took a strong stance against them. In fact, Freies in 1989 leaves little doubt that Heidegger was committed to Nazism and involved himself in the activities of the Nazi regime. It is iconic that someone with such unfortunate political leanings had such a significant influence in humanistic psychology. Husserl eventually felt betrayed by Heidegger in both terms of his changes in phenomenology and by his perceived anti-Semitism. Heidegger removed his dedication from the 1914 edition of his masterwork, Being and Time. Dasein. Heidegger used the term Dasein to indicate that a person and the world are inseparable. Dasein, maybe. Literally, Dasein means to be seen. There is Dasein. And Heidegger usually described the relationship between a person and the world as a being in the world. A more dramatic way of stating this relationship is to say that without the world, humans would not exist, and without humans, the world would not exist. The human mind illuminates the physical world and therefore brings it into existence. But Heidegger's concept of Dasein is even more complicated. To be means to exist, and to exist is a dynamic process. To exist as a human is to exist unlike anything else. In the process of existing, humans choose to evaluate, accept, reject, and expand. Humans are not static. They are always becoming something other than what they were. To exist is to become different. To exist is to change. How a particular person chooses to exist is an individual matter. But for all people, existence is an active process. The Da, or there, in Dasein, refers to that place and space and time where existence takes place. But no matter when and where it takes place, existence, to be, is a complex, dynamic, and uniquely human phenomenon. Unlike anything else in the universe, humans choose the nature of their own existence. Authenticity and inauthenticity. It was very significant for Heidegger that humans can ponder the infiniteness of their existence. For Heidegger, the prerequisite for living an authentic life is coming to grips with the fact that I must die someday. With that realization dealt with, the person can get busy and exercise his or her freedom to create meaningful existence. The existence that allows for almost constant personal growth or becoming. Because realizing that one's mortal causes anxiety, however, people often refuse to recognize the fact and thereby inhibit full understanding of themselves and their possibilities. According to Heidegger, this results in an inauthentic life. Where was I? An authentic life is lived with a sense of excitement and even urgency because one realizes life's existence is finite. With the time that one has available, one must explore life's possibilities and become all that one can become. And an inauthentic life does not have the same urgency because the inevitability of death is not accepted. One pretends, and pretending is inauthentic. Other inauthentic modes of existence, including living a traditional, conventional life according to the dictates of society and emphasizing present activities without concern for the future. The inauthentic person gives up his or her freedom and lets others make choices involved for his or her life. In general, the speech and behavior of authentic individuals accurately reflect the inner feelings, whereas with the speech and behavior of authentic individuals accurately reflect their inner feelings, whereas inauthentic individuals, this is not the case. Guilt and anxiety. Heidegger believed that we do not exercise our personal freedom, we experience. If we do not exercise our personal freedom, we experience guilt. Because most people do not fully exercise their freedom to choose, they experience at least some guilt. All humans can do is to minimize the guilt, is to try to live an authentic life. That is, to recognize and live in accordance with their ability to choose their own existence. Because acceptance of the fact that at some time in the future we will be nothing causes anxiety, such acceptance takes courage. Heidegger believes that choosing one's existence rather than conforming to the dictates of society, culture, or someone else takes courage. In general, living authentic life by accepting all conditions of existence and making personal choices means that one must experience anxiety. So for Heidegger, anxiety is a necessary part of living an authentic life. One reason for this anxiety is the authentic people are always experimenting with life, always taking chances, always becoming. Entering the unknown causes part of anxiety associated with an authentic life. Another reason that exercising one's freedom in life causes anxiety is that it makes one responsible for the consequences of those choices. The free individual cannot blame God, parents, circumstances, genes, or anything else for that matter for what he or she becomes. One is responsible for one's own life. Freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. Thrownness. Heidegger did, however, place limits on personal freedom. He said that we are thrown into the da, or there, of our own particular life by circumstances beyond our control. This thrownness determines, for example, whether we are male or female, short or tall, attractive or unattractive, rich or poor, American or Russian, at the time in human history that we are born, and so on. Thrownness determines the conditions under which we exercise our freedom. According to Heidegger, all humans are free, but the conditions under which that freedom is exercised varies. Thrownness provides the context of one's own existence. What Heidegger called thrownness has also been called facticity, referring to the facts that characterize the human existence. Yes. Ludwig Binswanger, 1881 to 1869, just kidding, 1881 to 1966. Obtained his medical degree from the University of Zurich in 1907, and then studied psychiatry under Eugen Bühler, a psychoanalysis under Carl Jung. Binswanger was one of the first Freudian psychoanalysts in Switzerland, and he and Freud remained friends throughout their lives. Under the influence of Heidegger, Binswanger applied phenomenology to psychiatry, and later to become an existential analyst. Binswanger's goal was to integrate the writings of Husserl and Heidegger with psychoanalytic theory, adopting Heidegger's notion of Dasein. Binswanger called his approach to psychotherapy Dasein analysis. Like most existential psychologists, Binswanger emphasized the here and now, considering the past or future important insofar as they manifest themselves in the present. To understand and help a person, according to Binswanger, you must learn how the person views his or her life at the moment. Furthermore, the therapist must try to understand the particular person's anxieties, fears, values, thought processes, social relations, personal meaning instead of the notions in general. Each person lives in his or her own private subjective world, which is not generalizable. Modes of existence. Binswanger discussed 3 different modes of existence to which individuals give meaning through their consciousness. They are the Umwelt, the around world, the world of things and events, the Mitwelt, the with world, interactions with other humans, and the Eigenwell, the own world, a person's private inner subjective experience. To understand a person fully, one must understand all three of his or her modes of existence. One of Binswanger's most important concepts was the Weltanschauung. We are going to do a lot of German word slaughtering up in here. Sorry. So Weltanschauung, or world design, worldview. I feel actually pretty good about that one. In general, world design is how an individual views and embraces the world. World designs can be open or closed, expansive or constructive, positive or negative, simple or complex, or they could have any number of other characteristics. In any case, it is through the world design that one lives one's life, and therefore the world design touches everything that one does. If the world design is ineffective, in the sense that it results in too much anxiety, fear, or guilt, it is the therapist's job to help the client see that there are other ways of embracing the world, other people, and oneself. Binswanger agreed with Heidegger that thrownness places limits on personal freedom. For Binswanger, the circumstances into which one is thrown determines one's ground of existence, defined as personal conditions under which one exercises one's personal freedom. However, no matter what a human's circumstances are, he or she appraises to transcend them. Aspires to transcend them. That is, not to be victimized or controlled by them, but everyone seeks being beyond the world. By being beyond the world, Binswanger is not referring to life after death or anything else supernatural, but in the circumstances in which people try to transform their circumstances by exercising their free will. Existentialism as a therapy. People may be thrown into negative circumstances such as poverty, incest, rape, or war, but they need not be devastated by those experiences. Most existentialists, like Nietzsche, proclaim, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." This strength comes from finding meaning even in negative experience and growing from the meaning. His famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, in 1946, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, 1905 to 1997, describes his experiences in a Nazi concentration camp. One of his major observations was that prisoners who, even under those dire circumstances, found meaning in their lives and something to live for, continued to live. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude at any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. According to Frankl in 1946, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning. By choosing, we change the meanings and values of what we experience. Although physical circumstances may be the same for different people, how those circumstances are embraced, interpreted, valued, symbolized, and responded to is a matter of personal choice. By exercising our freedom, we grow as human beings, and because exercising freedom is an unending process, the developmental process is never completed. Becoming characterizes the authentic life, which in turn is characterized by anxiety. Not becoming or remaining stagnant characterizes an unauthentic life, as does guilt, because a person does not attempt to fully manifest his or her human potential. Beyond Binswanger, such ideas would appear in a variety of existential approaches to clinical psychology following World War II. For example, Karl Jaspers, 1883 to 1969, also sought to merge existential philosophy with the practice of psychiatry, and his own analysis of being there mirrors the work of Heidegger and Binswanger in many ways. Initially trained as a physician, Jaspers would spend much of his academic career as a psychologist following the war. His writings became increasingly focused on existential philosophy. Prior to the Holocaust, Frankl had been a psychoanalyst associated with Freud and Adler. After his experience in the war, he would reinvent his clinical approach, calling it logotherapy, which he described as a phenomenological analysis of how people come to find meaning. Similarly, Medard Boss, 1903 to 1990, another Swiss psychiatrist previously associated with Breuer, Jung, and Horney, was also lead popularizer of the Dasein analysis after the war. Boss came to believe that any approach to understanding human nature that was limited to traditional science would be incomplete. A theme that we will see time and time again among the existential and humanistic thinkers that helped shape American approaches to clinical psychology. Rollo May, 1909 to 1994, introduced existentialism to U.S. psychology through a book he edited called Existence, A New Division in Psychiatry and Psychology, and Existential Psychology, 1961. May was born in Ada, Ohio. Neither of his parents were well educated, and there was little intellectual stimulation at home. When his older sister became psychotic, his father blamed it on too much education. May was not close to either of his parents, but he especially disliked his mother. May received his Bachelor of Arts degree at Oberlin College in 1930 and a Bachelor of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary in 1938. While at the Union Seminary, he met an existential philosopher named Paul Tillich in 1886 to 1965, and the two became lifelong friends. And in 1973, May wrote Paulus, A Reminiscences of Friendship, as a tribute to Tillich. After graduation, May served as a minister for 2 years at Montclair University, and in the 1940s he studied psychoanalysis at the William Allinson White Institute of Psychiatry, Psychoanalysis, and Psychology, and he became a practicing psychoanalyst in 1946. May enrolled in a doctorate program at Columbia University, but before he obtained his degree, he contracted tuberculosis and nearly died. During this depressing time, May studied Kierkegaard and Freud's views on anxiety. Upon returning to Columbia, he submitted The Meaning of Anxiety as his doctoral dissertation. In 1949, May received the first PhD in clinical psychology ever awarded at Columbia University. In modified form, his dissertation became The Meaning of Anxiety, 1950. May's other books include Man's Search for Himself in 1953 and Psychology and the Human Dilemma, 1967, Love and Will, 1969, Power and Innocence, A Search for the Sources of Violence in 1972. May died in 1994 of multiple causes. Like many other existential thinkers, May was strongly influenced by Kierkegaard, who had rejected Hegel's belief that an individual's life had meaning only insofar as it was related to the totality of things, which Hegel called the absolute. Kierkegaard proposed that each person's life is a separate entity and its own self-determined meaning. Is separate with its own self-determined meaning. Again, for Kierkegaard, subjectivity is truth. That is, a person's beliefs define a person's reality. The Human Dilemma. May in 1967 pointed out something. I lost my spot. Okay. May pointed out that humans are both objects and subjects of experience. We are objects in the same sense that we exist physically, and therefore things happen to us. As objects, we are not distinguished from the other physical objects that are studied by the natural sciences. It is as objects that humans are considered by the traditional methods of science. The assumption being that human behavior is caused in much of the same way that the behavior of any physical object is caused. Besides being objects, however, we are also subjects. That is, we do not simply have experience. We interpret, value, and make choices regarding our experience. We give our experience meaning. This dual aspect of human nature, which May called the human dilemma, makes us unique. By dilemma, May did not mean an insoluble problem. Rather, he meant a paradox of human experience. Normal and neurotic anxiety. May believed, along with other existentialists, that the most important fact about humans is that they are free. As we have seen, however, freedom does not produce a tranquil life. Freedom carries with it responsibility, uncertainty, and therefore anxiety. The healthy, authentic person exercises freedom to embrace life fully and to approach his or her full potential. Exercising one's freedom means going beyond what one previously was and ignoring the expectations or roles for one's behavior that others impose, and therefore often acting contrary to traditions, mores, or conventions. All this causes anxiety, but it's normal, healthy anxiety because it is conducive to personal growth or becoming. Neurotic anxiety is not conducive to personal growth because it results in the fear of freedom. The person experiencing neurotic anxiety lives his or her life in a way that reduces or eliminates personal freedom. Such a person conforms to tradition, religious dogma, and expectations of others, or anything else that reduces his or her need to make personal choices. Kierkegaard called the neurotic situation shut-upness. The neurotic is shut off from himself or herself as well as from other people. He or she has become alienated from his or her true self. Self-alienation occurs whenever people accept as their own values dictated by society rather than those personally attained. Self-alienation results not only in guilty but also in apathy and despair. The frightening aspects of human freedom and the many ways people attempt to escape their freedom are discussed in Erich Fromm's classic book Escape from Freedom in 1941. According to Kierkegaard, May, and most other existentialists, we can either exercise our free will and experience normal anxiety, or not exercise it and feel guilty. Obviously, it is not easy being human, for this conflict between anxiety and guilt is a constant theme in human existence. The conflict is between every human being's need for struggle towards enlarged self-awareness, maturity, freedom, and responsibility, and his tendency to remain a child and cling to the protection of parents and parental substitutes. The importance of myth. According to May, myths provide a major vehicle for providing meaning in life. A myth is a way of making sense in a senseless world. Myths are a narrative pattern that gives significance to our existence. After a long, illustrious career as a psychoanalyst, May reached the following conclusion about people seeking professional help. As a practicing psychoanalyst, I find that contemporary therapy is almost entirely concerned when all is surveyed with the problems of the individual's search for myth. In sympathy with Myth's conclusion, McAdams and Powles in 2006 say, the process of putting life's experience into a meaningful narrative form influences development, coping, and well-being. Because myth is a type of narrative, a story, May's observations that effective living depends on effective myths, supported by recently developed narrative therapy. Now, narrative therapy examines the stories by which people live and understand their lives and the effectiveness of those stories. In his analysis of myth, May in 1991 showed the alignment with Jung. Individual myths will generally be variations of some central theme of classical myths. Myths are archetypal patterns in human consciousness, and therefore, where there is consciousness, there will be myth. Like Nietzsche, Freud, and Jung, May believed that positive and negative tendencies coexist in all humans, and that the tension between them is the primary source of creativity. For May, it is the daimonic that is responsible for great literature, drama, and art, and is the daimonic that is at the heart of many myths. For example, myths portray conflicts between good and evil. May defines the daimonic as any natural fiction which has the power to take over the whole system. Sex and eros, anger and rage, and the craving for power are examples. The daimonic can either be creative or destructive, and it is normally both. The daimonic is the urge in every being to affirm itself, assert itself, perpetuate and increase itself. The daimonic becomes evil when it usurps the total personality without regard to the integration of the self, or to the unique forms and desires of others and their needs for integration, and then appears as excessive aggression, hostility, cruelty, the things about ourselves which horrify us most, which we repress whenever we can, or more likely project on others. But these are the reverse side of the same assertion, which empowers our creativity. All life is in a flux between these two aspects of the daimonic. May had little patience with those who portray humans as only good or bad. For him, we are all potentially both, and therein lies the dilemma of human existence. According to May, myths serve four primary functions. They provide a sense of identity, they provide a sense of community, support our moral values, and provide a means of dealing with the mysteries of creation. Most important, however, hunger for myth is a hunger for community. To be a member of one's community is to share in its myths. For May, then, the best myths are those that encourage a sense of kinship among humans. The myth of the rugged individual, popular for so long in the United States, encourages people to live in isolation that leads to loneliness and violence. Survival itself depends on replacing myths that isolate people with those that bind them together. For example, we awake after a sleep for many centuries to find ourselves in a new, irrefutable sense in the myth of humankind. We find ourselves in a new world community. We cannot destroy the parts without destroying the whole. In this bright loveliness, we know now that we are truly sisters and brothers, and at last the same family. May was not the only proponent of existentialism to be interested in the matters such as myth and human convention. Philosopher and anthropologist Martin Buber, in 1878 to 1965, combined Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, as well as the study of myth and convention in his classical analysis of human language, I and Thou, in 1923. Another anthropologist and Pulitzer Prize winner, Ernest Becker, in 1924 to 1974, combines elements of both Freud and Kierkegaard to explain human nature in books such as The Denial of Death and The Birth of Meaning. His ideas form the basis of terror management theory, which explains much of the social and clinical psychology in terms of our awareness of our own mortality. Human science. May was not opposed to studying humans scientifically. He was opposed, however, to merely employing the methods of physical sciences to study humans. Such methods, he said, overlook attributes that are uniquely human. Instead, May, in 1967, suggested the creation of a new science specifically designed to study humans. The outlines of a science of man, we suggest, will deal with man as a symbol maker, the reasoner, the historical mammal, who can participate in his community, who can possess the potentiality of freedom and ethical action. The pursuit of this science will take no less rigorous thought and wholehearted discipline than the pursuit of experimental and natural science at their best. But it will place the scientific enterprise in the broader context. Perhaps it will again be possible to study man scientifically and see him whole. Schneider in 1998 elaborates that human science envisioned by May and also discusses its relevance for contemporary psychology. Also, the emerging field of positive psychology, discussed later in this chapter, is moving in the direction suggested by May. George Kelly, 1905 to 1967, was born on a farm near Perth, Kansas. An only child, his father was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and his mother was a former school teacher. By the time Kelly was born, his father had given up ministry and turned to farming. And in 1909, when Kelly was 4 years old, his father converted a lumber cart into a covered wagon, and with it moved his family to Colorado, where he staked a claim to a plot of land offered free to settlers. Unable to find an adequate amount of water on their claim, the family moved back to Kansas. There, Kelly's education consisted of attending a one-room school and being tutored by his parents. From the pioneering efforts of his family, Kelly developed a pragmatic spirit that remained with him throughout his life. A major criterion that he used to judge an idea or a device was whether it worked. When Kelly was 13, he was sent to Wichita, where he attended 4 different high schools in 4 years. Upon graduation from high school, he attended Friends University in Wichita for 3 years, and then Park College in Parkville, Missouri, where he earned his bachelor's degree in 1926 with majors in physics and mathematics. Kelly was totally unimpressed with his first psychology class. For several class meetings, he waited in vain for something interesting to be said, and finally one day the instructor wrote SR on the blackboard, and Kelly, in 1969, believed that finally he was going to hear something interesting. He recalled his disappointment. Although I listened intensely for several sessions after that, the most I could make of it was that the S was what you had to have in order to account for the R, and that the R was put there so that the S would have something to account for. I never did find out what the arrow stood for or not. Not to this day, but I have pretty well given up on trying to figure it out. Next, Kelly went to the University of Kansas, where he earned his master's degree in 1929 with a major in educational psychology and a minor in labor relations. While at the University of Kansas, Kelly decided that it was time for him to become acquainted with Freud's writings. Freud did not impress him any more than S.R. psychology did. I don't remember which of Freud's books I was trying to read, but I do remember the mounting feeling of incredulity that anyone could write such nonsense, much less publish it. The next year was a busy one for Kelly. He taught part-time in a labor college in Minneapolis and gave speeches for the American Bankers Association and the Americanization class immigrants wished to become, and an Americanization class to immigrants wishing to become U.S. citizens. In the winter of 1928, he moved to Sheldon, Ohio, where he taught at a junior college. Among his duties, Kelly coached dramatics, and this experience may have influenced his later theorizing. It was here that Kelly met his future wife, Gladys Thompson, an English teacher at the same school. After a year and a half, Kelly returned to Minnesota, where he taught for a brief time at the University of Minnesota. He then returned to Wichita for work for a while at an aeronautical while in aeronautical engineering. And in 1929, he received an exchange scholarship, which allowed him to study for a year at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. It was while earning his advanced degree in education at Edinburgh, under the supervision of the illustrious statistician and psychologist Sir Godfrey Thompson, that Kelly became interested in psychology. His thesis was on predicting teaching success, and in 1930, on his return from Scotland, Kelly enrolled in a graduate program in psychology at the State University of Iowa, where he obtained his doctorate in 1931. His dissertation was on the common factors in speech, reading, and disabilities. Kelly began his academic career at Fort Hays, Kansas State College during the Great Depression. His was a time when there were many troubled people. Kelly desperately wanted to help them, but his training in experimental psychology did not equip him to do so. Ironically, however, his lack of training in clinical psychology, along with his pragmatic attitude, gave Kelly great latitude in considering emotional problems, and his observations eventually resulted in his unique theory of personality. Soon after arriving at Fort Hays, Kelly developed traveling clinics that serviced the public school systems. The clinics brought Kelly into contact with a wide range of emotional problems that both students and teachers experienced. Kelly soon made a remarkable observation. Because he was not trained in any particular therapeutic approach, he began to experiment with a variety of approaches. He discovered that anything that caused his clients to view themselves or their problems differently improved the situation. Whether a proposed explanation was logical or correct seemed to have little to do with its effectiveness. I began fabricating insights. I deliberately offered preposterous interpretations to my clients. Some of them were about as un-Freudian as I could make them. First, proposed somewhat cautiously, of course, and then I began to see that what was happening more boldly. My only criteria were that the explanation account for the crucial facts that the client saw them, and that it carry implications for approaching the future in a different way. In this statement lies the cornerstone of Kelly's position. Whether or not a person has a psychological problem is mainly a matter of how the person views things. At the beginning of World War II, Kelly joined the Navy and was placed in charge of a local civilian pilot training program. After the war, he taught at the University of Maryland for a year, and in 1946 moved to Ohio State University as a professor of psychology and a director of clinical psychology. It was during 19 years at Ohio State that Kelly refined his theory of personality and his approach to psychotherapy. And in 1955, he published his most important work, The Psychology of Personal Constructs, in 2 volumes. And in 1960, Kelly and his wife received a grant from the Human Ecology Fund, allowing them to travel around the world discussing the relationship between Kelly's theory and international problems. And in 1965, Kelly accepted a position at Brandeis University, where for a short time he was a colleague of Maslow. Kelly died in 1967 at the age of 62. His honors include presidencies at both the clinical and counseling divisions of the APA. He also headed the American Board of Examiners in Professional Psychology, an organization whose purpose was to improve the quality of professional psychology. Constructive alternativism. Kelly observed that the major goal of scientists was to reduce uncertainty. And because he believed that this is also the goal of all humans, he said all humans are like scientists. But whereas scientists create theories with which they attempt to predict future events, non-scientists create construct systems to predict future events. If either a scientific theory or a personal construct system is effective, it adequately predicts the future and thereby reduces uncertainty. And both scientific theories and construct systems are tested empirically. That is, they are both checked against reality and revised until their ability to predict future events or experiences are satisfactory. For Kelly, a construct was a verbal label. For example, on meeting a person for the first time, one might construe that person with the construct friendly. If the person's subsequent behavior is in accordance with the construct friendly, then the construct will be useful in anticipating the person's behavior. If the new acquaintance acts in an unfriendly manner, he or she will need to be construed either with different construct or by using the other pole of the friendly-unfriendly construct. The major point is that constructs are used to anticipate the future so that they must fit reality. Arriving at a construct system that corresponds fairly closely to reality is largely a matter of trial and error. For Kelly, whether or not an experience is pleasant or is relatively unimportant. Or greater importance is whether or not it validates the predictions generated by one's construct system. Kelly, in 1970, said, confirmation and disconfirmation of one's predictions have greater psychological significance than rewards, punishments, and drive reduction. With his concept of constructive alternativism, that's the name of that, Kelly aligned himself squarely with the existentialists. Kelly maintained that people are free to choose the constructs that they use in interacting with the world. This means that people can view and interpret events in an almost finite number of ways, because constructing them is an individual matter. No one needs to be a victim of circumstances, nor a victim of the past. All are free to view things the way they wish. We take the stand that there are always some alternative constructions available to choose among in dealing with the world. No one needs to paint himself into a corner. No one needs to be completely hemmed by circumstances. No one needs to be the victim of his biography. According to Kelly, it is not common experience that makes people similar. Rather, it is how they construe reality. If two people employ more or less the same personal constructs in dealing with the world, then they are similar, no matter how dissimilar their past experiences have been. My pen is dying. Garbage. Kelly also said that to truly understand another person, we have to know how that person construes things. In other words, we have to know what the person's expectations are, and then we can choose to act in accordance with those expectations. The deepest type of social interaction occurs when this process is mutual. Kelly and Weihanger. Although Kelly's thinking was existential in nature, there is no evidence that the existential philosophers or psychologists directly influenced him. However, he was aware of Weihanger's philosophy of as-if. Although there are important differences between Weihanger's philosophy and Kelly's theory, both emphasized propositional thinking, or the experimentation of ideas to see where they lead. About Weihanger, Kelly said in 1964, toward the end of the last century of German philosophy, Hans Weihanger began to develop a system of philosophy that he called the philosophy of as-if. In it, he offered a system of thought in which God and reality might be best represented as propositions. This was not to say that either God or reality was any less certain than anything else in the realm of man's awareness, but only that all matters confronting man might best be regarded in hypothetical ways. In some measure, I suppose I am suggesting that Weihanger's position has particular value for psychology. At least let us pursue the topic, which is probably the best way Weihanger would have proposed that we go about it. The following statement nicely summarizes Kelly's beliefs in the importance of propositional thinking and exemplifies his kinship with existential philosophy. Whatever nature may be, or however the quest for truth will turn out in the end, the events we face today are subject to a great and variety of constructions, as our wilts will enable us to contrive. Fixed role therapy. Kelly's approach to therapy reflects his belief in psychological problems that are perpetual problems, and that the job of the therapist is to therefore help the client view things differently. Kelly often began the therapeutic process by having his client write a self-characterization, which provided Kelly with information on how the client viewed himself or herself, the world, or other people. When Kelly created a role for the client to play for about the next few weeks. Next, Kelly created a role for the client to play for the next 2 weeks. The character in the role was markedly different from the client's self-characterization. The client became an actor, and the therapist became the supporting actor. Kelly called this approach treating clients fixed role therapy. Treating clients fixed role therapy. He hoped this procedure would help the client discover other possible ways of viewing his or her life. What I'm saying is that it is not so much what a man is that counts as it is what he ventures out to make himself. To make the leap, he must do more than disclose himself. He must risk a certain amount of confusion. Then, as soon as he does, he catches a glimpse of a different kind of life. He needs to find some way of overcoming the paralyzing moment of threat. For this, the instant, then, when he wonders what he really is, whether he is what he just was or what he is about to be. In the role of supporting actor, the therapist helps the client deal with a threatening moment and then provides experiences that validate the client's new construct system. According to Kelly, people with psychological problems have lost their ability to make believe, the ability that the therapist must help the client regain. Kelly's fixed role of therapy can also be seen in as early a version of narrative therapy that was discussed earlier. And in the 1960s, there was as much about people being themselves. There was as much talk about people being themselves. Kelly's advice was the opposite. A good deal is said these days about being oneself. It is supposed to be healthy to be oneself. It is a little hard for me to understand how one could be anything else. I suppose that it is meant that one should not strive to become anything other than what he is. This strikes me in a very dull way of living. In fact, I would be inclined to argue that all of us would be better off if we set out to be something other than what we are. Well, I'm not so sure we would all be better off. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say life would be a lot more interesting. Kelly became a major force within clinical psychology in the post-war years, both directly and through the works of his colleagues and students, including Julian Rotter, who coined the term locus of control, to distinguish between events that take responsibility for versus those we blame on external forces, and the humanistic psychologist Joseph Reichlach, whose texts popularized Kelly as a social psychologist and personality theorist. In England, Kelly's ideas remained popular even after his death, primarily because of the efforts of his disciple, Don Bannister. Exposure to Kelly's theory is a requirement in most clinical programs approved by the British Psychological Association. The popularity of Kelly's theory is again growing in the United States, especially in the areas of industrial organizational psychology. Other areas to which Kelly's theory is being applied include friendship formation, developmental psychology, perception, political science, and environmental psychology, depression and suicide, obsessive-compulsive disorders, drug and alcohol abuse, childhood disorders, fear of death, and physical illness, couples in conflict, and other relationship disorders. Snaps. Humanistic psychology. Abraham Maslow. Some argue that Alfred Adler should be considered the first humanistic psychologist because he defined a healthy lifestyle as one reflecting a considerable amount of social interest, and his concept of the creative self-stressed that a person becomes is largely a matter of personal choice. Certainly, Adler's theory had much in common with those theories later called humanistic. Usually, however, Abraham Maslow, 1909 to 1970, is recognized as the one most responsible for making humanistic psychology a formal branch of psychology. Maslow was born in Brooklyn, New York. He was the oldest of 7 children, both born to parents who were Jewish immigrants from Russia. Maslow recalled his father Samuel as loving whiskey, women, and fighting. Maslow disliked his father, but eventually made peace with him. Not so with his mother, however. Maslow hated his mother all his life. Maslow grew to maturity with an unrelieved hatred for her, and never achieved the slightest reconciliation. He even refused to attend her funeral. He characterized Rose Maslow as cruel, arrogant, and a hostile figure, one so unloving as to nearly induce madness in her children. In all of Maslow's references to his mother, some uttered publicly while she was still alive, there is not one that expressed any warmth or affection. It is interesting that Maslow saw the motivation for his work in humanistic psychology in his hatred for his mother. Shortly before she died, Maslow entered the following comment to his personal journal. I've always wondered where my utopianism, ethical stress, humanism, stress on kindness, love, friendship, and all the rest came from. I knew certainly of the direct consequences of having no mother love. But the whole thrust of my life philosophy and all of my research and theorizing also has its roots in hatred and revulsion against everything she stood for. Not being close to his parents and being the only Jewish boy in his neighborhood, Maslow was intensely lonely and shy and took refuge in books and scholarly pursuits. He was an excellent student at the Boys High School in Brooklyn and went on to attend college in City College in New York City. While attending City College, he made an effort to satisfy his father's desire for him to become a lawyer by also attending law school. Unhappy with law school, however, he walked out of class one night, leaving his books behind. Thereafter, he transferred to Cornell University, where he took introductory psychology from Titchener. Titchener's approach to psychology did not impress Maslow, and following only one semester at Cornell, he transferred back to City College, partly to be near his first cousin, Bertha Goodman, whom he loved very much. He and Bertha were married in 1928, when he was 20 and she was 19. Hold, his cousin? His first cousin. Okay. He and Bertha were married in Oh, yeah, we'll cover that. Prior to their marriage, Maslow enrolled in the University of Wisconsin, and Bertha joined him there. By Maslow's own account, his life did not really begin until he and Bertha moved to Wisconsin. As iconic as it seems now, Maslow was first infatuated with behaviorism of John Watson, in which he saw ways of solving human problems and changing the world for the better. His infatuation ended when he and Bertha had their first child. Our first baby changed me as a psychologist. It made the behaviorism I had been enthusiastic about look foolish, so I could not stomach it anymore. That was the thunderclap that settled things. I was stunned by the mystery and by the sense of not really being in control. I felt small and weak and feeble before all this. I'd say anyone who had a baby couldn't be a behaviorist. At the University of Wisconsin, Maslow earned his bachelor's degree in 1930, his master's degree in 1931, and his doctorate in 1934. As a graduate student at Wisconsin, Maslow became the first doctoral student to the famous experimental psychologist Henry Harlow. Maslow's dissertation was on the establishment of dominance in a colony of monkeys. He observed that dominance has more to do with a type of inner confidence than with physical strength. The observation that may have influenced his later theorizing. Oh. During this time, Maslow had observed the sexual behavior within the colony was related to dominance and subservience. He wondered whether the same was true for human sexuality, and possibly a possibility he would subsequently explore. After receiving his doctorate, Maslow taught at Wisconsin for a while before moving to Columbia University, where he became Edward Thorndike's research assistant. He also began his research on human sexuality by interviewing both male and female college students about their sexual behavior, but soon abandoned males because they tended to lie too much about their sexual activities. Maslow made important contributions to our knowledge of human sexuality several years before Kinsley's famous research. Furthermore, the interviewing skills he developed during the research served him well when he later studied the characteristics of psychologically healthy individuals. After a year and a half at Columbia, Maslow moved to Brooklyn College, where he stayed until 1951. Living in New York in the 1930s and 1940s gave Maslow an opportunity to come into contact with many prominent European psychologists who came to the United States to escape the Nazi rise. Among them were Erich Fromm, Max Wertheimer, Karen Horney, and Alfred Adler. Adler began giving seminars at his home on Friday evenings, which Maslow attended frequently. Maslow also befriended the famous anthropologist Ruth Benedict about the same time. Maslow became obsessed with trying to understand Ruth Benedict and Max Wertheimer, whom he considered truly exceptional people. And it was this obsession that evolved into Maslow's version of humanistic psychology. And in 1951, Maslow accepted the position as chairman of psychology at the Department of Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. And it was here that Maslow became the leading figure in the third force psychology. And in 1968, because of increased disenchantment with academic life and failing health, Maslow accepted a fellowship offered to him by the Saga Administrative Corporation. Hoffman, in 1988, describes the offer that was made to Maslow. Laughlin, the president and chairman of the Saga Corporation, cheerfully informed Maslow the fellowship was ready. He was prepared to offer Maslow 2 to 4 year commitment with the following conditions: a handsome salary, a new car, a personally decorated private office, a full secretarial service at Saga's attractive campus, like headquarters on Stanford University's suburban outskirts. What would Maslow have to do in return? Nothing. Maslow accepted, and as advertised, was free to think and write as he pleased. He enjoyed his freedom very much. And in June 1970, however, Maslow suffered a heart attack while jogging and died at age 62. Due primarily to Maslow's efforts, the Journal of Humanistic Psychology was founded in 1961. Also in 1961, the American Association of Humanistic Psychologists was established, and James F.T. Bergenthal as the first president of that. And the division of the American Psychological Association, Humanistic Psychology, was created in 1971. The basic tenets of humanistic psychology. The beliefs shared by psychologists working within the humanistic paradigm include the following. Little value, I'm going to label these. Little value can be learned about humans by studying non-human animals. Subjective reality is the primary guide for human behavior. Studying individuals is more informative than studying what groups of individuals have in common. A major effort should be made to discover those things that expand and enrich human experience. Research should seek information that helps solve human problems. The goal of psychology should be to formulate a complete description of what it means to be a human being. Such a description would include the importance of language, the valuing process, a full range of human emotions, and the ways humans seek and attain meaning in their lives. Charlotte R. Buehler, 1893 to 1974, was a founding member of the Association of Humanistic Psychologists and served as its president in 1965 to 1966. Her influential paper on humanistic psychology in 1971 elaborated several of the tenets listed above and showed their relevance to such topics as creativity, education, and psychotherapy. The wife of Gestaltist Karl Buehler, Charlotte had also worked with Thorndike and was a key figure in child psychology prior to World War II. Humanistic psychology, which rejects the notion that psychology should be entirely scientific, sees humans as indivisible wholes. Any attempt to reduce them to habits, cognitive structures, or SR connections results in a distortion of human nature. According to Maslow in 1996, psychologists are often use scientific method to cut themselves off from the poetic, romantic, and spiritual aspects of human nature. Briefly put, it appears to me that science and everything scientific can be and often is used as a tool in the service of a distorted, narrow, humorless, de-eroticized, de-emotionalized, desacralized, desanctified, the worldview. I'm not going to try to say that. Forget it. This desacralization can be used as a defense against being flooded by emotion, especially the emotions of humility, reverence, mastery, wonder, and awe. Humanistic psychologists flatly reject the goal of predicting and controlling human behavior, which is so many scientifically inclined psychologists accept. If humanistic science may be said to have any goals beyond sheer fascination with the human mastery and enjoyment of it, these would be to release the person from external controls and make him less predictable to the observer than to make him freer, more creative, more inner determined, even though perhaps more predictable to himself. Humans then are much more than physical objects, and therefore the methods employed by physical sciences have little relevance to the study of humans. Similarly, psychoanalysis, by concentrating on the study of psychologically disturbed individuals, creates a crippled psychology. It becomes more and more clear that the study of crippled, stunted, immature, and unhealthy specimens can yield only a crippled psychology and a crippled philosophy. For Maslow, there are exceptional people whose lives cannot be understood simply as the absence of mental disorders. These people must be studied directly. Health is not simply the absence of disease, or even the opposite of it. Any theory of motivation that is worthy of attention must deal with the highest capacities of the health and strong person, as well as with the defensive maneuvers of crippled spirits. Importantly, Maslow's point was not that psychology should stop attempting, but to be scientific and stop studying and attempting to help those with psychological problems, but that such endeavors tell only a part of the story. Beyond this, psychology needs to attempt to understand humans, who they are, in the process of reaching their full potential. We need to know how such people think and what motivates them. Thus, Maslow invested most of his energies in understanding exceptional human beings. The hierarchy of needs. According to Maslow, human needs are arranged in hierarchy. The lower the needs in the hierarchy, the more basic they are, and the more similar they are to the needs of other animals. The higher the needs are in the hierarchy, the more distinctly human they are. The needs are arranged so that as one satisfies a lower need, one can deal with the next higher need. Once physiological needs such as thirst, hunger, and sex are satisfied, one can deal with the safety needs, protection from the elements, avoiding pain and unexpected dangers. And when the safety needs are reasonably satisfied, one is free to deal with the belonging and love needs, the need to love and be loved, and to share one's life with a relevant other. When the belonging and love needs are adequately satisfied, one is released to ponder the esteem needs, to make recognizable contributions and achievements. It is the esteem needs that are met satisfactorily. One is in a position to become self-actualized. Maslow's proposed hierarchy needs can be diagrammed as followed. From the bottom up: physiological needs, safety needs, belonging and love needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization. Self-actualization. By self-actualization, Maslow meant reaching one's full human potential. So far as motivational status is concerned, healthy people have sufficiently gratified their basic needs for safety, belongingness, love, respect, and self-esteem, so that they are motivated primarily to tend to the self-actualization defined as ongoing actualization of potentials, capacities, and talents, as fulfillment of mission or call, fate, destiny, or vocation. As a fuller knowledge of and acceptance of the person's own intrinsic nature, as in increasing trend towards unity, integration, and synergy within the person. Musicians must make music, artists must paint, poets must write, if they are to be ultimately at peace with themselves. What humans can, they must be. They must be true to their own nature. This need we may call self-actualization. Aspects of the concept of self-actualization go back as far as Aristotle. But what Aristotle meant by self-actualization was the innate tendency to manifest the characteristics or the essence of one's species. For example, an acorn has an innate tendency to become an oak tree, or to exhibit the characteristics of oak treeness. Jung reintroduced the concept of self-actualization into modern psychology, and what he meant by the term, and what Maslow later meant by it, was distinctly different from the Aristotelian meaning. By self-actualization, Jung, Maslow, and Rogers, who we're going to consider next, meant that the realization of the individual's potential. Because it is impossible for any person to completely reach his or her full potential, Maslow referred to those who have satisfied hierarchical needs as self-actualizing. A list of characteristics of self-actualizing people is given shortly. As one climbs the hierarchy, the needs become more fragile. That is, the physiological and safety needs have a long evolutionary history, and therefore very powerful, and higher needs for love, esteem, and self-actualization are newer and distinctly human, and therefore do not have a firm biological foundation. This means that their satisfaction is easily interfered with. The higher up the hierarchy one goes, the truer this is. And therefore the satisfaction of need for self-actualization, although the need is innate, is easily disturbed. Of self-actualization, Maslow said, the inner nature is not strong and overpowering and unmistakable like the instincts of animals. It is weak and delicate and subtle, and is easily overcome by habit, cultural pressure, and wrong attitudes towards it. Thus, although all humans have an innate drive to be self-actualized, to reach their full potential as humans, self-actualized people are rare. Another major reason for self-actualization occurs so infrequently is that it requires a great deal of honest knowledge of oneself, and most humans are fearful of such knowledge. More than any kind of knowledge, we fear knowledge of ourselves, knowledge that might transform our self-esteem and our self-image. While human beings love knowledge and seek it, we are curious. They also fear it. The closer to the personal it is, the closer to the personal it is, the more they fear it. Related to the fear of self-knowledge is the Jonah complex, which Maslow in 1971 defined as the fear of one's own greatness, envision of one's destiny, and running away from one's best talents. According to Maslow, humans often fear success as much as they do failure. This fear, like the fear of self-knowledge, mitigates against self-actualization. Characteristics of self-actualizing people. As we have seen, Maslow believed that for too long, psychology has emphasized the study of lower animals and psychologically disturbed individuals. To begin to remedy this situation, he studied a number of people he thought were self-actualizing. Among them were Albert Einstein, Albert Schweitzer, Sigmund Freud, Jane Addams, William James, and Abraham Lincoln. Maslow concluded that self-actualizing people have the following characteristics. They perceive reality accurately and fully. They demonstrate a great acceptance of themselves and others. They exhibit spontaneity and naturalness. They have a need for privacy. They tend to be independent and of their environment and culture. They demonstrate a continuous freshness of appreciation. They tend to have a periodic mystic or peak experience. Maslow in 1957 described peak experiences as feelings of limitless horizons opening up to the vision, the feeling of being simultaneously more powerful and also more helpless than one ever was before, the feeling of great ecstasy and wonder and awe, the loss of placing in time and space, with finally the conviction that something extremely important and valuable had happened, so that the subject is to some extent transformed and strengthened even in his daily life by such experiences. A few more things that they're about here. They are concerned with all humans instead of only with their friends, relatives, and acquaintances. They tend to have only a few friends. They have a strong ethical sense but do not necessarily accept conventional ethics. They have a well-developed but not hostile sense of humor. They are creative. Although Maslow in 1954 concluded that his group of self-actualizing people was made up of outstanding humans, he has also indicated that they are not without faults. Our subjects show many of the lesser human failings. They are too equipped with silly, wasteful, and thoughtless habits. They can be boring, stubborn, irritating, and they are by no means free from rather superficial vanity, pride, partiality, and their own productions, family, friends, and children. Temper outbursts are not rare. Our subjects are occasionally capable of extraordinary and unexpected ruthlessness. It must be remembered that they are very strong people. This makes it possible for them to display a surgical coldness when this is called for, beyond the power of the average man. The man who found the long-trusted acquaintance was dishonest the man found that a long-trusted acquaintance was dishonest, cut himself off from this friendship sharply and abruptly, without any observable prangs whatsoever. Another woman who was married to someone she did not love, when she decided on divorce, did it with decisiveness and looked almost like ruthlessness. Some of them recover so quickly from the death of people close to them that it may seem heartless. Deficiency in being motivation. If a person is functioning at any level, If a person is functioning at any level other than self-actualization, he or she is said to be deficiency motivated. That is, the person seeking specific things to satisfy specific needs, or his or her perceptions are need-directed. Jorard describes need-directed perception, also called deficiency or deperception, as follows. Need-directed perception is a highly focused searchlight, darting here and there and seeking the objects which will satisfy its needs, ignoring everything irrelevant to the need. Deficiency motivation or demotivation leads to need-directed perception. Unlike most psychologists, Maslow was mainly interested in what happens to people after the basic needs are satisfied. His answer was that people who satisfy their basic needs and become self-actualizing enter a different mode of existence. Instead of being deficiency motivated, they are being motivated, be motivated. Being motivated involves embracing the higher values of life, such as beauty, truth, and justice. Being motivated people are also capable of be-love, which, unlike D-love, is non-possessive and insatiable. Insatiable. Yeah. Unlike deperception, being perception or be perception does not involve seeking specific things in the environment. Therefore, a person interacting with the world through B perception is open to a wider range of experience than a person who interacts through D perception. Transpersonal psychology. Towards the end of his life, Maslow began to ponder a new kind of psychology that went beyond personal experience. This transpersonal psychology would constitute the fourth force and would focus on mystical, ecstatic, and spiritual aspects of human nature. In the preface of this book, Toward a Psychology of Being, 1968, Maslow describes his vision of fourth force psychology. I consider humanistic third force psychology to be transitional, a preparation for a still higher fourth psychology, transpersonal, transhuman, centered in the cosmos rather than in human needs and interests, going beyond humanness, identity, self-actualization, and the like. These new developments may very well offer tangible, usable, effective satisfaction of the frustrated idealism. Many quietly desperate people, especially young people, these psychologies give promise of developing into a life philosophy, the religion surrogate, the value system, the life program that these people have been missing. Without the transcendent and the transpersonal, we get sick, violent, nihilistic, and else hopeless and apathetic. We need something bigger than we are, to be awed by, to commit ourselves to in a new, naturalistic, empirical, non-churchy sense. Maslow lived to see Anthony J. Steuch, 1907 to 1976, who was also a founding editor of the German Journal of Humanistic Psychology, found the transpersonal psychology in 1969. Maslow, the farther reaches of human nature. Maslow's The Farther Reaches of Human Nature appeared as a lead article in the New Journal. This article should not be confused with the book of readings published posthumously in 1971 with the same title. Transpersonal psychology has much in common with Western psychologies, philosophies, and religions. For example, all recognize meditation as a way to getting in touch with the higher states of consciousness. Many interested in the occult and in parapsychology are attracted to humanistic psychology, and especially to transpersonal psychology. Perhaps because these topics are generally viewed as outside the realm of science, the APA has thus far denied petitions to create a division of transpersonal psychology. Maslow's many honors include election of the presidency of the APA in 1968, at the time of his death in 1970. Maslow's ideas were influential not only within psychology, but also in the field of medicine, marketing, theology, education, and nursing. Although Maslow's influence has diminished, it is not uncommon for his theory of motivation to be taught in psychology, education, and business courses. Kuhn in 2006 speculates the reasons for Maslow's lasting appeal. Perhaps it is that his theory of motivation embodies deeply felt democratic ideals expressed in psychological terms. It is hopeful, optimistic, even utopian in its dream of an eventual epsia, good mind country. Given the right set of psychological and social conditions, every person among us has the potential to become happy, fulfilled, creative, emotionally whole, in Maslow's terms, self-actualized. It is the American ethos of self-improvement taken to its ultimate psychological conclusion. It is unabashedly embraces our right to live, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers, 1902 to 1987, was born in a Chicago suburb in Oak Park, Illinois, and was the fourth of 6 children. He was closer to his mother than to his father, who was a successful civil engineer and was often away from home. In an affluent suburb of Oak Park, Rogers attended school with Ernest Hemingway and the children of the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Rogers described his family as closely knit and highly religious. Friendships outside the family were discouraged. I think the attitudes towards persons outside our large family can be summed up schematically in this way. Other persons behave in dubious ways, which we do not approve of in our family. Many of them play cards, go to movies, smoke, drink, and engage in other activities. Some unmentionable. So the best thing to do is to be tolerant of them, since they may not know better, to keep away from any close communication with others. Live your life within your family. Not surprisingly, Rogers was a loner in school and, like Maslow, took refuge in books, reading everything he could get his hands on, including encyclopedias and dictionaries. When Rogers was 12 years old, he and his family moved to a farm 25 miles west of Chicago. The purpose of the move was to provide a more wholesome and religious atmosphere for the family. Because his father insisted that the farm be run scientifically, Rogers developed an intense interest in science, reading extensively about agricultural experiments. Roger maintained this interest in science throughout his career, although he worked in one of psychology's more subjective areas. When Rogers graduated from high school, he intended to become a farmer, and when he entered the University of Wisconsin in 1919, he chose to study agriculture. In his early years at college, Roger was very active in church activities, and in 1922, he was elected to attend the World Student Christian Federation Conference in Peking or Beijing, China. During this 6-month trip, Rogers, for the first time, experienced people of different cultures, with different religions. Rogers wrote to his parents declaring his independence from their conservative religion, and almost immediately he developed an ulcer that caused him to be hospitalized for several weeks. Upon returning to the University of Wisconsin, Rogers changed his major from architecture to history. He received his bachelor's degree in 1924. Shortly after graduating, he married his childhood sweetheart, Helen Elliott, with whom he eventually had 2 children. Soon after their marriage, Carl and Helen moved to New York, where he enrolled in the Liberal Union Theological Seminary, while also taking courses in psychology and education at neighboring Columbia University. After 2 years at seminary, Rogers' doubts were whether the religious approach was the most effective way to help people caused him to transfer to Columbia University on a full-time basis. There he entered his doctorate in 1913. His dissertation concerned the measurement of personality adjustment in children. After obtaining his doctorate, Rogers went to work in the Child Study Department of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in Rochester, New York, where he had served as a fellow while working towards his doctorate. Rogers had several experiences there that caused him to develop his own brand of psychotherapy. For example, the society was dominated by therapists trained in psychoanalytic tradition. People saw their job as gaining insight into the cause of the problem and then sharing that insight with the client. At first, Rogers followed this procedure. In one case, he concluded that a mother's rejection of her son was the cause of the son's delinquent behavior. But his attempts to share the insight with the mother failed completely. Rogers, in 1916, described what happened next. Finally, I gave up and I told her. It seemed we had both tried, but we had both failed. She agreed. So we concluded the interview, shook hands, and she walked out the door of the office. She turned and asked, "Do you take adults for counseling here?" When I replied with an affirmative, she said, "Well then, I would like some help." She came to the chair she had left, and she began to pour her despair about her marriage, her troubled relationship with her husband, her sense of failure and confusion, and all very different from the sterile case history she had given before. Real therapy began then. This incident was one of a number of which helped me to experience the fact only fully realized later that it was the client who knows what hurts, what directions to go, and what problems are crucial, what experiences have been deeply buried. And it began to occur to me that unless I had a need to demonstrate my own cleverness and learning, I would do better and rely on the client for the direction of movement in the process. It was while Rogers was employed by the Child Study Department that he wrote his first book, Clinical Treatment of the Problem Child, in 1934. Its publication led to an offer of an academic position at Ohio State University. Rogers was reluctant to leave the clinical setting, but when Ohio State agreed to start him at a rank of full professor, he decided, at the age of 38, to begin a new career in the academic world. At Ohio, Rogers communicated his own ideas concerning the therapeutic process in his now famous Counseling and Psychotherapy, Newer Concepts and Practice in 1942. It was widely believed that his book described the first major alternative to psychoanalysis. Rogers' approach to psychotherapy is considered revolutionary because it eliminated the needs for diagnosis, a search for the cause of disturbances, or any type of labeling of disorder. He also refused to call disturbed individuals patients. He had been, as had been the case with the psychoanalyst. For Rogers, people seeking help were clients. Grendlin in 1988 said that Rogers' proposed alternative to psychoanalysis was nothing less than a war against a monolithic authority. As part of a war effort in 1944, Rogers took leave from the Ohio State to become director of counseling services for the United Services Organization in New York. After 1 year, Rogers moved to the University of Chicago as a professor of psychology and a director of counseling. It was during his 12-year stay at Chicago that Rogers wrote what many consider to be his most important work, Client-Centered Therapy, A Current Practice, Implications, and Theory. This book marked a change in Rogers' approach to psychology. Originally, his approach was called non-directive, believing that a positive therapeutic atmosphere, clients will solve their problems automatically. Therapy became client-centered when Rogers realized that the therapist had to make an active attempt to understand and accept the client's subjective reality before progress could be made. It was also at Chicago that Rogers and his colleagues engaged in the first attempt to objectively measure the effectiveness of psychotherapy. Such people are said to be living according to the organismistic valuing process. Using this process, a person approaches and maintains experiences that are in accord with their actualizing tendency, but terminates and avoids those that are not. Such a person is motivated by his or her own true feelings and is living what the existentialists call an authentic life. That is, a life motivated by a person's true inner feelings rather than mores, beliefs, traditions, values, and conventions imposed by others. Here we see Rogers restating the belief that the ancient cynics and Rousseau in the primacy of personal feelings as guides for action. In the following quotation, Rogers, in 1961, we are a strong similarity among ancient cynicism, Rousseau's romantic philosophy, and Rogers' humanistic psychology. One of the basic things which I was in a long time realizing, which I am still learning, is that when an activity feels as though it is valuable and worth doing, it is worth doing. To put another way, I have learned that my total organismistic sensing of a situation is more trustworthy than my intellect. All of my professional life, I have been going in foolish directions which others thought were foolish, and about which I have had many doubts myself. But I have never regretted moving in directions which felt right, even though I have often felt lonely or foolish at the time. Experience is for me the highest authority. Oh, I'm saying that all wrong. Experience is for me the highest authority. Neither the Bible nor the prophets, neither Freud nor research, neither the revelations of God nor man can take any precedence over my own existence. Unfortunately, according to Rogers, most people do not live according to their innermost feelings, the organismistic valuing process. A problem arises because our childhood need for positive regard. Positive regard involves receiving such things as love, warmth, sympathy, and acceptance from the relevant people in the child's life. If positive regard is freely given to a child, no problem will arise. But usually it is not freely given. Instead, parents or other relevant people give children positive regard only if they act and think in certain ways. This sets up conditions of worth. The children soon learn that in order to receive love, they must act and think in accordance with the values of relevant people in their lives. Gradually, as the children internalize those values, the values replace the organismistic valuing process as a guide for living life. As long as other people live their lives according to someone else's values instead of their own true feelings, experience will be edited, and certain experiences would have been in accord with the organismistic valuing process will be denied. In order to hold the love of a parent, the child introjects as his or own values and perceptions, which he does not actually experience. He then denies to awareness the organismistic experiences that contradict these introjections. Thus, his self-concept contains false elements that are not based on what he is in his experiencing. According to Rogers, there's only one way to avoid imposing conditions of worth on people, and that is to give them unconditional positive regard. With unconditional positive regard, people are loved and respected for what they truly are. Therefore, there is no need for certain experiences to be denied or distorted. Only someone who experiences unconditional positive regard can become a fully functioning person. If an individual should experience only unconditional positive regard, with no conditions of worth would develop, self-regard would be unconditional. The needs for positive regard and self-regard would never be at variance with organismistic evaluation, and the individual would continue to be psychologically adjusted and would be fully functioning. When conditions of worth replace the organismistic valuing process as a guide for living, the person becomes incongruent. What Rogers called an incongruent person is essentially the same as what the existentialists call an inauthentic person. In both cases, the person is no longer true to his or her own feelings. Roger viewed incongruency as the case of mental disorders. And he believed, therefore, that the goal of psychotherapy is to help people overcome conditions of worth and again live life in accordance with their organismistic valuing process. Rogers in 1959 described this goal as the follows. This, as we see it, is the basic estrangement in man. He has not been true to himself and his own natural organismistic valuing of experience, but for the sake of preserving the positive regard of others, has now come to falsify some of the values he experiences and to perceive them only in terms based upon their value to others. Yet this is not a conscious choice, but a natural, tragic development in infancy. The path of development towards psychological maturity, the path of therapy, is the undoing of the estrangement of man's functioning, the dissolving of conditions of worth, and the achievement of the self which is congruent with experience, and the restoration of the unified organismistic valuing process as the regulator of behavior. When people are living in accordance with their organismistic values, they are fully functioning. The fully functioning person embraces life as much of the same way as Maslow's self-actualization person does. Roger fully appreciated the fact that human growth can be facilitated by relationships other than between therapist and client. Rogers, in 1980, described that conditions that must characterize any relationship is that relationship is going to facilitate personal growth. There are 3 conditions that must be present in order for a climate to be growth promoting. These conditions apply whether we are speaking of the relationship between therapist and client, parent and child, leader and group, teacher and student, or administrator and staff. The conditions apply, in fact, in any situation in which the development of a person is the goal. The first element could be called genuineness, realness, or congruence. The second attitude of the importance of creating the climate for change is acceptance, or caring, or prizing, or what I've called unconditional positive regard. And the third felicitative aspect of relationship is empathetic understanding. This kind of sensitive, active listening is exceedingly rare in our lives. We think, we listen, but rarely do we listen with real understanding and true empathy. Yet listening is a very special kind. Yet listening, this very special kind, is one of the most potent forces to change that I know. Rogers' person-centered psychology has been applied to such diverse areas as religion, medicine, law enforcement, ethnic and cultural relations, politics, international conflict, as well as other organizational development, education, marriage, personal power, and the future. And we will have more to say about Rogers' contributions to professional psychology in Chapter 20. Comparison of existential and humanistic psychology. Existential and humanistic psychology have enough in common to cause them often to be lumped together as existential humanistic psychology. The following is a list of tenets shared by existential and humanistic psychology. Humans have free will and therefore responsible for their own actions. The most appropriate method by which to study humans is phenomenology, the study of the intact subject experience. To be understood, the human must be studied as a whole. Elementism of any type gives a distorted view of human nature. Humans are unique, and therefore anything learned about animals is of limited use for the understanding of humans. Each human is unique, therefore anything learned about one human is of limited use for understanding of others. Living an authentic life is better than living an inauthentic one, because one possesses unique attributes such as free will. Humans cannot be effectively studied using the traditional scientific methodology. The major difference between existential and humanistic psychology lies in their assumptions about human nature. The humanists assume that people are basically good, and therefore, if placed in a healthy environment, will naturally live a life of harmony with others. For humanists, the major motivator in life is the actualizing tendency, which is innate and which continually drives a person towards these activities and events conducive to self-actualization. The existentialists, on the other hand, view human nature as essentially neutral. For them, the only thing we are born with is the freedom to choose and the nature of our existence. That is what Jean-Paul Sartre meant by his famous statement, existence precedes essence. For Sartre, most existential philosophers, there is no human essence at birth. We are free to choose our own essence as a unique human being. We become our choices. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Such is the first principle of existentialism. We can exercise our freedom to create any type of life we wish, either good or bad. A major motive in life, according to the existentialist, is to create meaning by effectively making choices. Many existential thinkers, such as Albert Camus, reached the conclusion that without meaning, life is not worth living, that with meaning, humans can tolerate almost any condition. Viktor Frankl quoted Nietzsche as saying, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." Frankl maintained that there is only one motivational force for humans, and that is called the will to meaning. Generally, the view of human nature the humanists hold causes them to be optimistic about people and their future. Our societies could be made compatible with our nature. They say humans could live together in peace and harmony. The existentialists are more pessimistic. For them, humans have no built-in guidance system, but only freedom to choose. Because we are free, we cannot blame God, our parents, genetics, or environmental circumstances for our misfortune, only ourselves. This responsibility often makes freedom more of a curse than a blessing, and people often choose not to exercise their freedom by conforming to values of others that others have formulated. In his book, Escape from Freedom in 1941, Erich Fromm, in 1900 to 1980, echoed Kierkegaard in his observation that often the first thing people do when they recognize their freedom is attempt to escape from it by affiliating themselves with someone or something that will reduce or eliminate their choices. Another important difference between humanistic psychologists and existentialists, like Heidegger and much later Becker, is that for existentialists, the realization that one's death is inevitable is extremely important. Before a rich, full life is possible, one must come to grips with the fact that one's life is finite. To live unto death. Live unto death. And live unto death. Okay, I needed to say that a bunch of times. The humanistic psychologist does not dwell on such meaning of death of human existence. For additional discussion on the differences between existential philosophy and humanistic psychology, see Di Carvalho. In Chapter 20, we will note the similarities between third force psychology and contemporary postmodernism. Evaluation. Criticisms and conclusions. It should come to no surprise that humanistic psychology itself has been criticized. For the following, each of the following has been offered as one of its weaknesses. The description of persons that humanistic psychologists offer is like the more favorable ones found through the centuries in poetry, literature, and religion. It represents a type of wishful thinking that is not supported by the facts, and more objective psychology has accumulated. We should not ignore facts just because they are not to our liking. Humanistic psychology, there's another one. Humanistic psychology criticizes behaviorism, psychoanalysis, and scientific psychology in general, but all three have made significant contributions to the betterment of human condition. In other words, all three have done the very thing that humanistic psychology sets as one of its major goals. If humanistic psychology questions traditional scientific methodology as a means of evaluating propositions about humans, what is to be used in its place? If phenomenology is to be used, what enterprise should not be referred to as psychology? The humanistic approach to studying humans is often characterized as a throwback to psychology's past. By minimizing animal research, humanistic psychologists are turning their backs on an extremely valuable source of knowledge about humans. Not to use the insights of evolutionary theory in studying human behavior is, at best, regressive. Many of the terms and concepts that humanistic psychologists use are nebulous to defy clear definition and verification. There is even confusion over the definition of humanistic psychology. After searching for definition of humanistic psychology, the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, in various books on humanistic psychology, and in the programs of the Division of Humanistic Psychology of the APA, Michael Wertheimer in 1979 reached the following conclusion. It is hard to quarrel with such goals as authenticity, actualizing the potential inherent in every human being, creating truly meaningful human relationships, being fully in touch with our innermost feelings, and expanding our awareness. But what really is humanistic psychology? To paraphrase an old Jewish joke, if you ask two humanists what humanistic psychology is, you are likely to get at least three mutually incompatible definitions. It is highly unlikely that the explicit definition of humanistic psychology could be written that would satisfy even a small fraction of the people who call themselves humanistic psychologists. As William James said, if existing methods are ineffective for studying certain aspects of human nature, it is in those aspects of human nature that are to be discarded. But if not those aspects of human nature that are to be discarded, it is not those aspects of human nature that are to be discarded, but the methods. To be fair, humanistic psychologists do not want to discard scientific inquiry. They want to expand our conception of science so that we can inquire, so such inquiry can be used to study the higher human attributes. Indeed, the expansion of psychology's domain is arguably humanistic psychology's major contribution to the discipline. In psychology, there is now an increased tendency to study the whole person. We are concerned with not only how people learn, think, and mature biologically and intellectually, but also how people formulate plans to attain future goals and why people laugh, cry, and create meaning in their lives. In the opinion of many, the humanistic paradigm has breathed new life into psychology. Recently, a field called positive psychology has developed that, like traditional humanistic psychology, explores positive human attributes. Siegelman and Csikszentmihalyi in 2001, I can't say that name, described what positive psychology has in common with traditional humanistic psychology and what makes it different. The purpose of positive psychology is to remind our field that psychology is not just the study of pathology, weakness, and damage. It is also the study of strength and virtue. Treatment is not just fixing what is broken, it is nurturing what is best. Psychology is not just a branch of medicine concerned with illness or health. It is much larger. It is about work, education, insight, love, growth, and play. And in this quest for what is best, positive psychology does not rely on wishful thinking, faith, self-deception, fads, or hand-waving. It tries to adapt what is best with the scientific method to the unique problems that human behavior presents to those who wish to understand it in all its complexity. Both positive psychologists and humanistic psychologists agree that mental health is more than the absence of mental illness. Currently, the term flourishing is used to describe people who are not only free from mental health, but, more importantly, are filled with vitality and are functioning optimally in their personal and social lives. In fact, the characteristic of flourishing individuals are essentially the same as those thought by Maslow to characterize self-actualizing individuals, or those thought by Rogers to characterize fully functioning individuals. For additional information on positive psychology, see the work of the 1998 APA president, Martin Siegelman. That's the dude who discovered learned helplessness. All right, let's summary. Yay. In the 1960s were troubled times in the United States, and a group of the psychologists emerged who believed that behaviorism and psychoanalysis, the two major forces in psychology at the time, were neglecting important aspects of human existence. What was needed was a third force that emphasized positive, creative, and emotional side of humans using the methods of phenomenology. Brentano and Husserl, there we go, developed phenomenology. Which is the study of intact conscious experiences as they occur and without any preconceived notions about the nature of those experiences. According to Brentano, all conscious acts intend to refer to something outside themselves. An example is the statement, "I see that girl." Husserl thought that a careful, objective study of mental phenomena could provide a bridge between philosophy and science. Both existentialism and phenomenology flourished in Europe around the time of World War II. Key figures in France, including Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Campus, Husserl's students, Heidegger expanded phenomenology into existential inquiry. Heidegger studied Dasein, or being in the world. Heidegger believed that although humans have free will, they are thrown by events beyond their control into life circumstances. Thrownness determines such things as whether a person is male or female, rich or poor, attractive or unattractive, and so on. It is up to each person to make the most of his or her life, no matter what the circumstances. Positive growth occurs when a person explores possibilities for living through his or her choices. Choosing, however, requires entering the unknown and causes anxiety. For Heidegger, only by exercising one's freedom can one live an authentic life, a life that a person chooses, and therefore a life for which a person is completely responsible. If a person lives his or her life in accordance with other people's values, he or she is living an inauthentic life. For Heidegger, the first step towards living an authentic life is to come to grips with the inevitability of death, non-being. Once a person comprehends and deals with the finitude, he or she can proceed to live a rich and full, authentic life. Binswanger applied Heidegger's philosophical ideas to psychiatry and psychology. Binswanger called this approach to psychotherapy Dasein analysis, or the study of the person's approach to being in the world. For Heidegger, Binswanger believed that the circumstances into which one was thrown places limits on personal freedom. Thrownness creates what Binswanger calls the grounds for existence. from which one has to begin the process of becoming by exercising one's freedom. According to Binswanger, each person attempts to rise above his or her ground by existing or attempting or to attain being beyond the world, that is, to rise above the current circumstances by transforming them through free choice. Other existential analysis at the time included Jaspers, Frankl, and Boss. May was primarily responsible for popularizing existential psychology in the United States. Like the other existential psychologists, May believed that normal healthy behavior involves the experience of anxiety because living an authentic life necessitates venturing into the unknown. If a person cannot cope with normal anxiety, he or she will develop neurotic anxiety and will be driven from an authentic life to a life of conformity or to a life that is overly restricted. May believed that healthy people embrace myths and provide a sense of identity and community and support moral values and provide a way of dealing with the mysteries of life. People without such myths, isolated and fearful, and often seek professional help. May believe that most unique aspects of human elude traditional scientific methodology, and therefore, if humans are to be studied scientifically, the new human science will need to be created. Kelly, who was not formally trained as a clinical psychologist, tried a number of approaches in helping emotionally disturbed individuals. He found that anything that caused his clients to view themselves and their problems differently resulted in improvement. Because of this observation, Kelly concluded that the mental problems are really perceptual problems, and he maintained that humans are free to construe themselves and the world any way they choose. According to Maslow, usually considered the founder of the third force psychology, human needs are arranged in a hierarchy. One satisfactorily meets the physiological, safety, belonging, and love, and esteem needs, and then the other is the position to become self-actualized. Leading a new life characterized by fullness, spontaneity, and creativity, the self-actualizing person is being motivated rather than deficiency motivated. That is, because the person has met the basic needs, he or she does not need to seek specific things in the environment. Rather, he or she can embrace the world fully, openly, and ponder the higher values of life. Like Kelly, Rogers concluded that the only way to understand a person is to determine how that person views things, that is, to determine the person's subjective reality. This view resulted in Rogers' famous client-centered therapy, which became a major therapeutic alternative to psychoanalysis. Like Maslow, Rogers postulated an innate actualizing tendency, and for this actualizing tendency to be realized, one has to use the organismistic valuing process as a frame of reference for living one's life. That is, one has to use one's own inner feelings in determining the value of various experiences. If one lives according to one's organismistic valuing process, one is a fully functioning person and is living an authentic life. Unfortunately, because humans have a need for positive regard, they allow other people in their lives to place conditions of worth on them. When conditions of worth replace the organismistic valuing process as a frame of reference for living one's life, the person becomes incongruent and lives an inauthentic life. Existential and humanistic psychology share the beliefs that humans possess a free will and are therefore responsible for their actions. Phenomenology is the most appropriate method for studying humans. Humans must be studied as a whole beings. The search for meaning is the most important human motive. All humans aspire to live authentic lives, and because humans are unique, traditional scientific methodology cannot be used effectively to study them. The major difference between existential and humanistic psychology is the latter views human nature as basically good, whereas the existential psychologists do not believe that there is an innate guidance system. Existential psychologists see freedom as a curse as well as a blessing, and something from which most humans attempt to escape. Humanistic psychology has been criticized for offering a description of humans more positive than the facts warrant, and for minimizing and ignoring the positive contributions of behaviorism and psychoanalysis. Humanistic psychology's major contribution has been to expand psychology's domain by urging that all aspects of humans be investigated, and that psychology's conception of science has changed to allow objective study of uniquely human attributes. Recently, the field of positive psychology has emerged, studying positive human attributes, but doing so in a manner of more scientifically vigorous than was often the case with traditional humanistic psychology. However, both traditional humanistic psychology and positive psychology insist that mental health is more important than the absence of mental illness. Both describe a truly healthy person as living an exciting, meaningful life.